So we have a slim Orthodoxy 101 class today, but that's okay. And today we're going to talk about the liturgical cycle. In other words, all the different services that we do in the church, like what do they mean and why do we do them? All right, so we're going to go through a bunch of them. It's a lot of information, but just go with it. All right? So a few things just to know. So the life of the Orthodox Church, if you're an Orthodox Christian, you're built around a liturgical year. And so we go from Pascha, that's our word for Easter. We call it Pascha, which is the Greek word for Passover. All right? And so we celebrate, that's the center of the church year. Every calendar, every reading, everything is based off of that. And so Pascha is kind of the center. And we go and we date ourselves kind of from Pascha to Pascha. All right? And that's a movable feast. There are some feasts that are fixed. For example, in a few weeks, we're going to have the entrance of the Theotokos to the temple. That's always November 21st. But Easter is always different because it's based on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. I know that doesn't mean anything. But it could be a short one or a long one depending on when that happens. So all the ones that are based around Easter can be moved in the year. Like sometimes we'll have a late Easter. You probably noticed that. And sometimes you have an early Easter. It's because it's moving according to that calendar. But then we have other ones that go along with that as well. So we live in a cycle of feasts and fasts. And we're going to go through the major feasts of the church. And then we also have certain periods of the time when we fast, when we don't eat meat. And that is part of our discipline in celebration. Okay? So, to complicate things even more, because Orthodox, we can't do things simple. We have to do things complicated. We have this thing where we call the new liturgical year. Because, that calendar that moves, that feast, that Pascha, so sometimes you'll have, say if you have a late Pascha, and then you have an early one, that means you'll have a short year. And then if you have an early one, right, you may have a long year. So the readings and stuff that we do are based on that. So at some point we have to realign. And so that's why we use the date of September 1st. That helps us realign the calendar. So if you look at the calendar upstairs, I don't know if you have, I think I gave you one.
Yes.
Right? Every day of the year has a saint and it has readings from the New Testament, an epistle and a Bible and a gospel. And so all those, so if it's like this weekend is the 22nd Sunday after Pascha, after Pentecost. So it will always be that reading, wherever that may fall. So that's how we kind of keep that alignment with all of this. There's some monks who sit there and they do the calculations and they put it out each year. And that book is called this, the Liturgical Rubrics. Rubrics means red, by the way, because the instructions for the priest are written in red. And so this comes out every year, and the priests look at it, and it tells you who are the saints for the day, what are the readings for the day, how are the services organized for each day of the year, and you'll find out why we have to do that. And so it's kind of written in a sort of code. So like if you're a priest, you kind of understand the code because you know certain things. But it's not that complicated. But it also gives instructions when you can do weddings, when you can't do, what colors are the church going to be in. We change the colors of the church. All those things are in there, so it helps you do it. So that's called...
So is that available for laymen?
Yeah, anybody can buy it. Yep. The new one comes out. I just ordered it. And we get all excited. And then we all look at it. All the priests look at it, and we try to find the mistakes. So... The monks at St. Tikhon's monastery, our monastery in Pennsylvania, they put it together each year. They're authorized to put it together. So how do we know what services to do, right? Well, this is a short version of it. It's called the Typica. What does that word sound like, Typica?
Typical?
Typical. Right. So it's exactly right. This is the typical services that you're supposed to do. And this gives you the outline on how they're supposed to be done. So it also gives you all sorts of instructions. So the Typica is what we use. Of course, in the Orthodox world, there are two typicas. Of course, right? There is what's called the Marsaba typica that was based in Jerusalem, out of the monastery in Jerusalem. And most of the Russian Slavic-based churches use that one. And then there's the Great Church typica, and most of the Greek churches use that one. What are the differences? Very minor stuff. Like whether you do this service or that service, it's pretty minor. But there are two typicas. The Orthodox Church in America, who we're part of, we were part of the Russian Church, so we use more of that Russian style with the Marsaba and the way that is organized. So that's all that means. And then you saw the liturgical calendar. All right. So you have to think of wheels within wheels. All right. So in the Orthodox Church, we have something called a daily cycle. These are the services that would happen every day. Normally in a parish, you won't see that. But in a monastery or a seminary, you'll see this daily cycle. We'll talk about each of these. Then we have what's called a weekly cycle. So if you hear, like if you were in church on Sunday and you heard, well, the Prokimenon is in the first tone, or the Prokimenon is in the third tone. What that is a weekly cycle. We have 8 tones. It's in a book called the Octoikos. It means 8. And when you get to 8, after 8 weeks, you start again at 1. And it just is different reflections on in different styles of music. Okay, so you have a daily cycle. Now you have a weekly cycle. And then you have what's called the monthly cycle. That's in the book called the Menaion. Menaion means month. And guess how many volumes there is of a Menaion? 12. 1 for each month of the year. So if the books if you have them all, it costs like $1,500, you know. It has every day of the week in every month set up for what the saint is, what's the special period, and all that. Thankfully, computers have been very generous to us, so all that stuff is put together, and you can just go on the OCA website, and they've already done it. So you don't have to do it. So we have the daily cycle, we have the weekly cycle, and then we have the monthly cycle. And what is the monthly cycle? Well, there are certain periods of the church, or rather yearly cycle, that are special to us, okay? And those things are special because of the way they do it. So the first one we have this book called the Festal Menaion. And that has every feast day in the church that is fixed. So how do you celebrate Christmas? Right? How do you celebrate the Feast of Transfiguration? How do you celebrate the one that's coming up, the entrance of the Theotokos? They're all found in here. All right? So each of the major feasts, and we'll learn about those in a bit, are found in what's called the Festal Menaion. Right? Then you have the most special period of the church year. Right? That's the Lenten period. All right? So Lent it has a pre-Lent, then it has specific Sundays for Lent, and then has what's called Holy Week. That goes from Palm Sunday to just when the priest opens the doors on Pascha night. So all the services that we do during Lent are found in called the Lenten Triodion. Triodion means 3 hymns. It's just the way in which they organize the services. So this book helps us understand what we're serving in Lent. Anybody can pick these up, by the way. And then, when we start that Easter service, it goes all the way through Pentecost, which is 40 days. And those are found in the Pentecostarian. So this is all the celebration of all the happy, joyful services that we have in the church. All right? So again, that's basically our annual cycle. So we have it going through, again, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. All these wheels are turning, and it hurts your brain. And that's why you have that book. Okay? Because that organizes all of that. Because certain things have certain precedents. For example, what would you do if there's a feast of a great saint of the church, but there's also a feast at the same time of one of the major feasts? And it may be during a fasting period. Like, how did that all fit together. So the church has come, and over the centuries and centuries and centuries, almost 1,000 years, they've worked it out. So this goes here and that goes there, and it all kind of works itself together. All right? Am I clear? I'm trying to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember in the church is that we always talk about what we're going to do, we do it, and then we talk about what we just did. So you'll see something like the forefeast, right? That means we're talking about the feast we're going to celebrate. Then we celebrate the feast. And then we set what's called the after feast, which means we talked about what we just did. And then we have this term called leave taking. What does it mean when we say taking leave of something? You're saying goodbye, right? I'm taking leave. So leave taking means you're saying goodbye to that feast. So just always remember, every feast day in the church has a pre-feast, a feast, an after feast, and a goodbye. The ultimate one is Lent. We have a whole period of preparation for Easter. Then we celebrate this Easter. Then we have a whole period afterwards, and then we have a saying goodbye. All right? So the church makes it really, really beautiful. And that takes up a lot of time in the year. The dating of Pascha we talked about. The calendar issue. I'm not going to go deep into this, but as you notice, sometimes in the church, our Easter will be different than in the West. Right? Sometimes it's the same day. Sometimes it could be up to a month apart. That's because for Easter, the Orthodox use the old way of dating the calendar. All right? And the West, they adopted a different calendar. Right? But we keep the old calendar. So most of the Orthodox churches will use the old calendar for all the stuff dealing with Easter. All right? So that way, every Orthodox church in the world is celebrating Easter in the same day. But some of them will use a new calendar for fixed days. So when I was a kid, Christmas was always celebrated on January 7th because we were using the old calendar. But then we switched to the new calendar, so now it's December 25th. Which actually January 7th is December 25th in the old calendar. But don't confuse yourself with it. So that's all that means, is that there's different calendars that are being used. All right? And it's always a big discussion in the church about which calendar we should use. Okay? And then the final other thing is, in the Orthodox Church, we celebrate, if you remember in Genesis, it says there was evening and there was morning one day. In the Orthodox Church, when we have the sun going down, that means we're going into the next day. All right? So that's the next day of... So on Saturday night, when we do the Vespers, like you've been to the Vespers, and we have that hymn, O Gladsome Light, that actually is the lighting of the evening lamps, and that means we're now in the next day. Okay? We're now celebrating the next day. So we always go from sunset to sunset. It's a very Jewish way of timing things. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, every Sunday in the Orthodox Church is an Easter. If you listen carefully to the liturgy, all the hymns have to do with resurrection. Because Sunday is the day of Easter. It's the day of resurrection. So every Sunday, the Orthodox Church celebrates the resurrection. And that's really important for us to understand how important the resurrection is, Christ's resurrection is to our celebrations and to our life. It's the center of what we do. All right? So I just threw a bunch of information at you. Are you good with that?
So far.
Okay. You with me? Okay. If you're not, just tell me and I'll explain a little bit more. So, let's start about the first one, the daily cycle. These are the services that you'll in a normal situation in a monastery or at seminary, you'll have every day. So as I said, right, we start at sunset. So it actually starts the night before. So we have Vespers. That's the evening service. That's the service with the setting of the sun. There are different types of Vespers, daily Vespers, great Vespers. That all has to do to the level in which we want to celebrate. But the key thing is, when you hear, I just talked about gladsome light, there's this hymn, Vouchsafe, O Lord, to keep us this night without sin. That's our transition to the next day. All right? And then the Saint Simeon's prayer. That's, Lord, let us now thy servant depart in peace. That's the hymn that you hear when Simeon was in the temple and he held the Christ child. And he said that he would have that chance to see the salvation. And he says that hymn before he gives the child back. We say that every day in the church. In fact, every child I baptize, I bring into the altar and I present to Christ, and I say that prayer before I hand them back to the children, to their parents. So Vespers is the evening service. Saturday evening, that's what we're doing. If you're in a seminary, every Saturday, every evening, you have a Vesper service, okay? The next one we have is called Compline. Compline is the service of sending people to bed, basically. So if you're in a monastery, you'll have this service. It's a short service. You're praying, and you're sending the monks and nuns to bed. In a parish life, how you doing? In parish life, Compline you'll see at certain times of the year during Lent. We'll do it. So, have a seat.
Thank you.
That's okay. It's not a problem. So when we hear, we're just going through the daily services of the church, okay? So when you hear Compline, just think that's where they're sending people to bed. Again, you don't see these all the time in parish life, but you'll see bits and pieces of it. Then the next one is, well, you don't want the monks and nuns to sleep through the night, right? They can't. They got to get up and pray. So they have this service called Nocturne. Nocturne is the midnight service. So they wake everyone up to bed, you do some prayers, and then you go back, right? Again, you'll see this once a year on Easter night. We'll go through so quickly you don't even realize that we did it, all right? But that's just normal in parish life. But in monasteries, like when I would stay at a monastery, it's hard to get me out of bed at midnight to go pray, but they would wake you up and you would do that service, okay? Then the next one you'll see is Matins. So you had the service for the setting of the sun. Now we have the service for the rising of the sun. And that's what the Matin service is. So you'll see Matins, they'll call it Orthros in the Greek church. The Greek tradition, one of those differences between the Greek and Russian traditions is that before liturgy, the Greek tradition, they'll do Matins, where in the Russian tradition, we do what's called hours. But Matins you'll see during Lent. You'll see at other different times if we did a vigil, which is the Matins and the Vespers together for a feast day. It's the service of the rising of the sun. And what's really cool about this, if you go to monasteries, because remember we had to light the lamp. Now you have to kind of blow the lamp out for the night. And so they have a whole service about blowing out the lamps to start your day. So it's kind of a cool sort of thing to see. You with me so far? Then what we have is these things called the first, third, sixth, and ninth hours. Think of it as a military watch, right? Every so often you have to change the guard, right? So the first hour roughly goes at 6 o'clock, the third hour at 9 o'clock, or first, third, the ninth hour at noon, first, third, sixth at noon, and the ninth hour is at 3 o'clock. And so basically what that is the monks and nuns gathering back together to pray. And it has to actually remember I told you Easter, every Sunday is an Easter? Well, every day we kind of celebrate that because they celebrate Christ's betrayal, Christ's crucifixion and burial and resurrection at those hours. All right, so that's what it is. Now, sometimes on feast days, you'll put those together into one service. They're called the royal hours because the emperor used to come. But when you walk into church, like you guys are in church and you came and there were someone chanting before the liturgy started. They were just chanting these prayers. They were doing the first and third hour before we started the liturgy. So that's what that is. It's just a set of psalms. Most of our prayers are psalms. They come right from the Psalms. Okay? So then you have the liturgy, if it's designated for that day. In a monastery, they could do it every day. In the parish, we could, if we had the time. But in seminaries, you don't even really do them every day. But then the liturgy would be in between the third and sixth hours. Then we talked about this. We have what's called the resurrection vigil, That's because, as I told you, Sunday is a resurrection day each week. So the vigil, the resurrection vigil, is on Saturday nights and has this all about how we're celebrating the resurrection. It's a mini Pascha service. So when you see our Easter service, when you come to it, all the other services are just a watered down version of that. It's done in its fullness on Easter, but every Saturday night and Sunday we do a watered down version because we're still celebrating it. So that's what the resurrection vigil means. There are 11 resurrection readings in the New Testament, and we rotate through them every 11 weeks. Okay? We always are reminding ourselves. And then we have something called the festal vigil. So if we have a feast day, like we're going to talk about, the night before we have a vigil service where we have the Vespers and the Matins put together. We read the readings, we sing the hymns, we bless wheat, wine, and oil, and everyone gets anointed with it. It's just the way in which we celebrate it. So that's all that is. Okay? With me? It's complicated, isn't it? That's why you have a priest. He does all that. We talked about that. And then we have what you'll see a couple times. I'll have an announcement. I'll say, I'm going to do an akathist. I love saying this. Akathist to the Theotokos. If you're not Orthodox, you have no idea what I just said. An akathist is a prayer service. Theotokos is the mother of God. So it actually means akathist, no sitting. You're not supposed to sit during it. But the akathist is just a prayer service. So on Thanksgiving Day, here, we're going to do an akathist of Thanksgiving. We're going to do a prayer service thanking God. And there's all sorts of akathists for every saint and all sorts of things. And priests can do them anytime they want to do them. All right? Any questions? Nope? Good. There's no tests on this stuff, you know. It's just... So that's the daily cycle. Now, we talked about the daily, and then we also know that we have that weekly cycle, that next wheel within the wheel. And that's called the Orthodoxy, which means 8. So if you hear someone upstairs saying, again, the Prokimenon is in the 3rd tone, that just means we're in the 3rd week of that cycle. And when we get to 8, we go back and start all over to 1. And they're all just beautiful meditations on the gospel and on Christ. It starts each Sunday evening, it goes for the entire week. And then each day, is, if you look at this, is dedicated to a particular theme. Sunday is always the resurrection. Mondays to the angels. Tuesdays to John the Baptist. Wednesday is the cross and the Theotokos. Thursday is the apostles and St. Nicholas. Friday is the cross and the Theotokos. And Saturday is for the saints and the departed people. So every day we're celebrating something. And then you're going to see these weird words, okay? What do these words mean? I know when you look at the liturgy book and we get to a certain part and everyone's like, it's not in the book. That's because they rotate every week. They're different. All right? It's according to the theme, the saint of the week, the name of the church, all those things. So a troparion, is just a hymn. It's a theme song. So if we have the hymn to St. Nicholas, the tropar, it's just the hymn to St. Nicholas is a theme song that outlines what we're celebrating. And a kontakion is kind of like an extra hymn song. It actually came from a scroll. There's something called stikira. You see, you're going to learn all sorts of Greek. Stikira are just verses. So when you have a service like Vespers, right? And you're at the Vesper service and we're doing the Lord I call and I'm sensing around the church. And then you'll see there's psalm verses and then the choir sings something and someone chants and the choir sings something and it goes back and forth. Those are called stikara. And they're all organized according to the feast and the saint and all those sort of things. And the choir director has to put them together according to that book. So that's all it is. It's just different reflections. So if you listen carefully, you'll hear a lot of theology in those hymns. The theology of the church is usually found in those. What do we really believe about this person or this feast or Christ or whatever? They're all found in those hymns. Then we have something called a canon. A canon is not something we shoot, to blow things up. A canon is a long meditation on a theme. So it's a beautiful poetic composition. And so if we have the canon for St. Andrew, which we do during Lent, it was written by St. Andrew of Crete. And it's this beautiful, long meditation of what's called canticles, and each of them is a reflection from an Old Testament theme and how it applies to Christ. Okay, so that's what when you see the word canon, that's what it means. And finally, we have a prokimenon, which you'll hear all the time in the church. Prokimenon literally means that what comes before. It's a psalm verse that helps reflect on what we're going to hear in the epistle and the gospel. Okay? And those all change. These are always changing, and they're always being mixed and matched and all that stuff. That's why you have to have like 12 books of this and other books like that. And thank God for computers, because the OCA, you can just mix it all together and boom. The choir director doesn't have to have all the books to figure out what we're singing when. Question? No? We good?
It's very complicated.
It is very complicated, and I do this on purpose because I want you to realize how full our worship is. Like, it's not just Father Eric's going there and saying, oh, this is what I want to do on this Sunday. It's all part of a thing, and every Orthodox church in the world is doing the same thing.
Yes.
And they've been doing the same thing for close to 2,000 years. That's pretty amazing to think about that. You know, this is stuff that had been developed and talked about and debated, and then the church decided. And even when a new saint happens, the church has to decide how are we going to celebrate him in accordance with the way the church has always celebrated. And they kind of plug him in or her in to that beautiful tradition. So that's why it's complicated, but it's not. Like, if you grow up as an Orthodox Christian, you just know this stuff. But the first time you see it, it's kind of like overwhelming. But as you come to the services, you'll start to recognize it. And our next class, when we do the Divine Liturgy, we'll start going through the actual liturgy. You'll see why there's such a beautiful rhythm and how it's put together that helps guide us. Good? All right. And I'm throwing all these things out, so if you hear that word like being mentioned, you're like, oh yeah, Father mentioned that word. You know, that's all. So now we have the monthly cycles. We have the daily, we have the weekly, now we're going to the monthly, right? So we have the Menaians, I told you about that. It means month. That's at 12 volumes. That has every single day of the year. Who are the saints, what's the special time of the year, what all the hymns associated with that. And each day is listed with the themes. And it also, the Menaian is not always, it could be regional. For example, in Russia, you're obviously going to have more saints who are Russians, right? In Greece, you're going to have more saints who are Greek. In Serbia, more saints who are Serbian. In America, where we have now 14 American saints, you know, we're going to concentrate more on that. But then again, there are some saints that are universal, right? Everyone celebrates them. They're, you know, the apostles or St. Nicholas or whoever it may be. So each church kind of puts together its list of like who we're going to celebrate because this makes sense for us in this area. So when you look at that book, right, and you'll see like up here, these are the lists, for example, you just open random, but this is what? This is this Sunday, right? Yeah. So if it's bold, that means St. John Chrysostom. That's the main saint we're celebrating. And then these are all the other saints that we're celebrating, right? So this tells me right there, it's 22nd Sunday after Pentecost, right? Or the 8th in Luke. It's tone 5, right? We just talked about that, right? And the main saint is St. John Chrysostom. If you're doing an all-night vigil, these are what the Old Testament readings are, and the Matins Gospel. And then if you listen carefully on Sunday, these are the epistle and the gospel that we'll be doing. Right? Yeah. And then this tells me all the ways in which those stikar, right? So there are 10 of them. 5 are for the resurrection, because it's a Sunday, right? And I can't read upside down. 4 for the saint, so that's St. John Chrysostom, right? And then, so that's your 10. And then you have these other split things. The Prokimenon is for the day. The Litia, that's when we celebrate for feast days with the wheat, wine, and oil, if you do that. So it's all there. Same with the Matins. And then if you go to the liturgy section, so when you come to church on Sunday, after the entrance, when they have all those hymns that they're singing in a row, this is exactly what they are. We're singing a hymn to the resurrection, a hymn to Mary, a hymn to the saint, another hymn to the resurrection, another to the saint, to the name of the church, and then the final one. It's all laid out right there. It's all from those books. Isn't that kind of cool when you think about it?
Just imagine every month just having to write it.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of the hymns were written by Saint Romanus, the melodiist, and he kind of compiled a lot of this. There were a couple of saints who were very famous who took all the stuff that was out there in the church and put it together into the books. Like St. John Chrysostom, that's the liturgy we celebrate of St. John Chrysostom. He didn't write it, but he put it together because it had already been done. So he kind of codified it. And, but yeah, so some monks at St. Tikhon's monastery, their job is every year to get all the stuff and put that book together to send out to the priest. So we don't have to do it. And I know the monks that do it. And they spend weeks and weeks and weeks with all their books laid out. And again, computers are nice to us now.
They use computers or they do type with the books?
Oh, I mean, they have the books and stuff. They always check back. But, I mean, now everything is organized that it's by a program. Like a lot of the stuff is put into the program now. Like if you go to the OCA website and you pick it, it's because we had a program written that will take all these different things and it actually has the algorithm or whatever to read it and put it in the right place. It's kind of cool. But a really good, see, I always make my seminarians, that's one of the first classes they do, is I'll pick a random thing from there and I'll say, all right, now put the service together for me. And they have to go run and find the books and get the things so they know how to do it in case the computer goes down, right? Yeah. So they have to be able to do that and show me that they know how to put a service together. So if you ever want to become readers in the church, I make readers of the church. Those are the people who chant. They have to learn how to do that as well. And the other thing you'll notice, sometimes for some saints, we'll have a lot. Like we'll have a lot of hymns. The hymns will be long. We know a lot about them. For some of the saints, we don't know a lot. We just know that they were killed, for example, in this time of the year by this person. And so there's standard sort of words that they use. Well, if he's a martyr from this period, then this is how we're going to sing about them. But some of them are very extensive and beautiful. And the hymnology is very well thought out because we knew more about them. It's always interesting because I know the couple of the priests, when we have new saints, who had to come up and write for the new saints. And that had to be approved by the bishop saying, yeah, this is good. And the work they put into it, studying and really coming and then writing the hymns and then presenting it to the bishops for them to say, yeah, this is good, or no, go back to the drawing board, until they felt that this was right and it fit within the Orthodox world on how we sing. It's kind of interesting to see it happen. We have definitely one new saint being considered, Saint Olga, or Matushka Olga in Alaska. She was an Alaskan woman who had great healing powers for people who suffered in Alaska. So she's under consideration, and then there's a couple of others that will. But usually, we'll have a class all on this about saints. Usually you don't make saints until everyone who knew them died. But it's a different process than you hear from the Catholic Church in how we make saints. So actually God makes the saints, we just recognize it. But we'll talk about that in a later class. So, the Paschal cycle, right? That's the one I was talking about. So Pascha is the center of our church year. Everything goes around Pascha, which is Easter. That's our word for Easter. You missed that. Pascha is the Greek word for Passover. All right, so Pascha is our thing. So we have what's called the Lenten Triodion. Yet another book, right? That's why priests have lots of books. So this is the book on all the services that begin Lent. Not only do we talk about what we're going to do, we talk about what we're going to talk about what we're going to do for Lent, okay? Because it's that important. So every Sunday in Lent has a theme. And has a saint assigned to it, and a theme and a reading assigned to it to help prepare us We're going to go through that. And then we have the Pentecostarian, right? And that's when we start singing Christ is risen, all the way through Pentecost. And that's all the celebrate. That's talking about what we just celebrated. Okay? And every Sunday of Pentecost has a specific gospel reading and a theme. Okay? So, how do we know we're going into Lent? The first Sunday we have in the pre-Lent is called Zacchaeus Sunday. Zacchaeus, if you remember from your gospel, he was the tax collector who was short, and he climbed in the tree because he wanted to see Christ. And Christ told him to come down, that salvation has come to his house, he's going to eat with him, and he gives all his money back. So Zacchaeus for us is that great sign of repentance. So when you see Zacchaeus Sunday is coming, that means Lent is coming up for us. And then we have the following Sundays, the publican and the Pharisee. Do you remember that gospel story? That's about the two men went up to pray. One was a publican, a tax collector. They like to go after tax collectors and lawyers. Always get beat up in the church. And
They always get beat up?
yeah, they always get beat up. For good reason, by the way. And then you have the Pharisee. That was a Jewish leader who was in charge of making sure everyone kept all the laws. And the one publican goes and he says, "Oh, I'm such a sinner, forgive me." And the Pharisee, who's supposed to be holy, like, thank God I'm not like this guy. Right? And so what is the lesson there is that we all need to be repentant, right? And not put ourselves above anything. And then we have the prodigal son. Everyone knows, right? The prodigal son, the father gave him the money. He went off, he wasted all the money, then he repented and he came back to his father, and his father received him with his arms open. Can you get the lesson on that one? Okay, that we're all supposed to come back to our fathers. And then we have called the Last Judgment. So that's the reading in the gospel about how Christ will come in judgment and he'll separate the sheep from the goats, and we'll be judged according to how we treat our brothers. So we're getting into that. But it's also known as a meat fair. So when you say fair, what do you think? Like farewell, right? So meat fair is the last Sunday we eat meat. And then we start to do the meat fast, that we don't eat meat again until Pascha night. As New Orthodox, you don't have to worry about that yet. But that's
How long is that?
40 days.
40 days?
Yeah. We have other ones too. And so then we have what's called the expulsion from paradise, which is another gospel which talks about how, again, is about judgment. Right? And then that's called cheese fair. Because if you're really strict as an Orthodox, if you're like a monk or something, you also don't eat dairy for all of Lent. No meat and no dairy. I don't expect anyone to do it. But in monasteries, they don't eat meat anyway, ever. They're totally vegetarian. But anyway, so when you see cheese fair, that's the last saying farewell to cheese. But you also have another thing we do. In the Catholic Church, how you enter Lent, right? You have, Ash Wednesday, whatever, they put ashes. In the Orthodox Church, we have Forgiveness Sunday. So everybody in the church asks forgiveness of everyone else. And we have a special service after the liturgy. And one by one, starting with the priest, while the Paschal hymns, the great hymns for Easter are being sung, because we won't hear them again until Easter, we all go before each other and we say, "Forgive me, God forgives." And we all do that. Go right in a big circle. Whether you know the person, you don't know the person, whether it's your spouse or your kids, we all ask forgiveness. Whether you're the bishop, whether you're just a little kid, we all ask forgiveness of each other. And that's how we start Lent. It's a beautiful, beautiful service. We used to trick my dad because my dad didn't like it. And we wouldn't tell him that it was Forgiveness Sunday. And then he'd come in and he'd say, "Oh, you no one told me that it was Forgiveness Sunday." And then what we have is the first week of Lent is really intense. We have services every day. They are services, mostly they're called the Canon of St. Andrew. Remember Canon I told you about was a poetic. So you have Canon of St. Andrew, which is it goes through all these Old Testament themes about how we've fallen away from God and how we come back to him. And so we have that every day. And then we have these special services called pre-sanctified liturgy. They're on Wednesdays and Fridays throughout Lent. It's a divine liturgy, a Eucharist service, but I have an extra lamb that I've consecrated on Sunday. And so it's like a Vesper service with an extra communion added on the end. And then we have Memorial Saturdays where we remember the departed. So that first Saturday of Lent, I have lists and lists of everybody in the parish who gave me names of people that died. And we pray for them because they're still in the church, whether you're living or dead. And we ask them to pray for us and we pray for them. So it's called a Memorial Saturday. So the first week of Lent is intense. Got Forgiveness Sunday. And then you go to the second Sunday of Lent, which is called the Sunday of Orthodoxy. That's the celebration when icons were returned to the church because they were kicked out of the church because there was a movement to destroy them. Yet we prevailed and they were brought back. And so we celebrate that. So people bring icons to the church and we do processions around the church with the icons. Then we have Sunday of St. Gregory Palamas. He was a great saint, a later saint. Well, Orthodox, we say later, we mean 14th century. That's late for us. And he was a great teacher about the spiritual life and about how if we pray and we live the light, that we can be with God. And then we have the halfway point of Lent. We have the Sunday of the Cross. So we bring out the cross in the church. It's kind of our halfway point, a little bit of relaxation. It's a little bit more joyful. But we do these, what's called prostrations. We'll bow before the cross. Like you ever seen Muslims, you know how they do the bowing? They took it from us. We always, we bow before the cross, before God, no one else, right? So that's the Sunday of the Cross. And then we have the Sunday of St. John Climacus, St. John of the Ladder. He was this great teacher who taught, he was in Egypt, and he taught about going up the ladder. It's one of his famous books of how you grow towards God. And then we have St. Mary of Egypt. She was a great saint of the church who was a prostitute and actually repented and became this incredible monastic saint. It shows that no matter where you are in the world, wherever your life is, it can be forgiven if you truly repent. And you can be exalted before God. And that's our Sundays of Lent. By that time, you're kind of like, okay, let's get to the end, right? But we're not quite there. The other thing that you'll notice during Lent, we'll do what's called the St. Ephraim's prayer. That comes from the early 4th century. It's a beautiful prayer that we do in which we do prostrations. And it says, O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk, but give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love for your servant. Yea, O Lord and King, grant me to see my own transgressions and not to judge my brother. You'll hear it enough times, you'll know it by heart. It's a beautiful thing. It talks about how we should be looking at our own self and not judging everyone else. All right, so that's our beginning. Then we get into Holy Week. Holy Week starts technically on the day before, for Lazarus Saturday, when Lazarus is raised from the dead. And then we have Palm Sunday. Now, it's interesting, in the Orthodox Church, you're not just going to see palms. You're going to see pussy willows. Why would we have pussy willows? You know what pussy willows are? Have you ever seen them? They're long things. They have those fuzzy little...
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, they have like these fuzzy little buds. Well, think about it. In many of the northern countries, there are no palm trees, right? So how are you going to celebrate without palms? Yet, at that time of the year, the pussy willows start to come out. And it says in the Bible that they lifted palms and willows. So we do it. So the tradition is not just to have palms, but also have pussy willows. And when we celebrate, and we do processions, we go around the church, and the church is all decorated with them. And it's all kind of joyful because we got the week of weeks coming up, Holy Week. And so we have all these services, which are called the bridegroom matins, which basically is because they're all, the first 3 days are preparing us, and it's talking about how we have to be prepared for the celebration. I'm going to have a whole class on all this stuff, all right, so you don't get wrapped up. And then we have, when it really gets going, we have the celebration of the first Eucharist, not the Last Supper, we call it the first Eucharist. And that actually is when I prepare I have reserved sacrament on the altar that I bring out to people who are sick. On Holy Thursday every year, I prepare it for the year. And I'll show you all about how that's done. And then on Holy Friday, we bring out, if you go into church and you notice on the left-hand side, there's a cross and a table. That is brought into the middle. And we start celebrating the crucifixion. And we actually have processions, and we have these wonderful, on Thursday night, we do 12 gospel readings, all about the crucifixion and Christ being put in the tomb. And it's a long week. Let's just put it that way. You're in church a lot. And then, if you looked in the back of the church, you noticed there was this shroud, and it had the body of Jesus laying on it. Right? When you go up there, you look at it next time. That actually, I take that out on Holy Friday and place it in the tomb. Where that cross is, that becomes a tomb. And on Easter night, when we were singing about Christ rising from the dead for the first time, I actually lift it out and I put it on the altar table, and it sits there for the Easter season. So you'll see, and we'll do processions with that shroud. We'll do processions around the church. And that leads us all the way up to Holy Saturday, which is when we celebrate Christ being in the tomb, ready to be resurrected. We have 15 Old Testament readings that talks about all the resurrection kind of times in the Old Testament, kind of gives us a hint that this is what's going to happen. And then comes our service on Pascha night, which starts at 11:30 at night. And at midnight, we start celebrating the resurrection. We go out in a procession with candles, and then everything is changed from dark to white, and all the lights are turned on, and we get funky and crazy, and we go till like 3 a.m, and then we come downstairs and we eat and drink because we haven't eaten and drink for 40 days, and we party until the sun comes up. We do it right. Let's put it that way.
So that goes from what time to time? From like
11:30 we start, and then we kind of, because we have a Compline, a nocturne, a matins, and a liturgy, all put together in one service. So we usually finish around 2 a.m. And then we come down, I bless, people bring baskets full of food that they haven't eaten, like all the different meats and cheeses, and I bless the baskets, and we all sit here and we just drink and eat and just enjoy each other's company. I go to bed because I got to serve it in the morning. So I can only do so much. And then we have the next morning, at noon, we have the shortest service of the year. It's a beautiful Vesper service with a procession. And the kids go hunting Easter eggs and all that sort of stuff. All right? Again, we're going to talk all about this in detail, but just I want you to see how beautiful and glorious this week is. And then Bright Week is the week after. And every day we do, if we could, we don't. You do the same service every day, same Paschal liturgy every day, and celebrate it. And it also has themes. And then, just as we talked about preparing for Easter, now we have to look back. So each of those Sundays, we have 40 days, no fasting, eat anything you want, anytime you want, enjoy yourself. But each Sunday has a theme. Thomas Sunday, right? When the doubting Thomas, when he wasn't sure about the resurrection. Then we have the myrrh-bearing women, how they came and brought to anoint the body of Christ. Then we have these wonderful things, the paralytic, the Samaritan woman, the blind man, all about people being healed by Christ. And then we go for the fathers of the first council, and we get to Ascension, which is 40 days. That's when Christ, according to the Bible, was ascended into heaven. And 50 days, that's what Pentecost means. That's when we celebrate the Holy Spirit coming down on the people. So that's called Pentecost. And that's when the first time we get, during the whole Paschal season, we're not allowed to get on our knees. We're supposed to be lifted up. But on Pentecost, we have a set of prayers the first time we go on the knees, and then we enter into that regular year again. Okay? With me?
so far.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So just a few things about this. So remember I was telling you about we have these great feasts of the church, right? All in here. So we have the 12 great feasts of the church. And each of those feasts have a theme. And usually has something that we do. For example, Theophany or Epiphany, which is January 6th. We celebrate Christ's baptism. We also bless holy water for the week, for the year. So there's a service of blessing waters. And then we go out to the creek and we bless that creek. And I throw a cross in there. And we make that holy water, which then goes out throughout the whole world. So we have all different, every feast has something like that, where we bless something. And in the summer, we bless fruit on Transfiguration, because that's when all the fruit's out. Or on Dormition, we bless flowers and herbs, because that's when they're all blooming. Or we bless candles, or we bless, we did water. Everything has a theme, and that was associated with some way with Christ. In a sense, we bless all of creation throughout the year. So here are the great feasts of the church. And remember I told you that September 1st is that kind of how you readjust? So if you take the first feast of the year, it's the birth of Mary on September 8th. And you take the last feast of that year, August 15th, which is the Dormition or death of Mary. So her life kind of encompasses, just like her body encompassed Christ, her life encompasses his. We have a feast on September 14th for the elevation of the cross. That's when the true cross was found in Jerusalem, and it was lifted up before the people, and it healed the people. Well, every church on September 14th, we do the same thing. We bring the cross up and we present it to the people. If you're with a bishop, he gets to do it 100 times. But that's another story. 40 days after Mary is born, she's presented in the temple, according to the tradition of the church. Then we have the Nativity. That's Christmas, right? Count backwards from December 25th, and you go to March 25th. It's exactly 9 months. So Annunciation, when Christ was conceived, when Mary was told, you go exactly 9 months, and you have Christmas. How long is a baby in a womb? 9 months, right? By the way, from the conception of Mary to her birth is 40 days minus 1, and the conception of John the Baptist to his birth is 40 days plus 1. Christ has the perfect birth. Isn't that interesting? We call that liturgical math. We also have, 40 days, or not 40 days, but 8 days afterwards, we do the Theophany. That celebrates the baptism of Christ when he was in the river. In the Orthodox tradition, when a child is born, normally at 40 days is when you baptize the child. So 40 is a big number in the New Testament. 40 days after the Nativity is the Feast of the Meeting of the Lord. Remember I told you when Christ was brought into the temple and the priests received him and said that beautiful prayer. Annunciation we talked about. Transfiguration is when he went up on the mountain and he transfigured before the people. Why is it August 6th, which is also my birthday, by the way? Why is it August 6th? Because that was the day the church was dedicated on there. And there's no other reason. And then Dormition, August 15th, which is the celebration of the death of Mary. So those are the great feasts. And each one of them, by the way, you'll see different icons come out. Some of them have different colors associated with it. So the church vestments will change. It's all part of that celebration. These are some of the minor feasts. Don't worry about it. Just know there's, you'll see I'll have liturgy here for December 6th for St. Nicholas. Everybody celebrates Jolly St. Nicholas, though he's not what you think he is. St. Basil or any of these all. So you'll have, again, different ones. We'll have our patronal feast. So we're called St. Gregory the Theologian. Our feast is in January. The bishop will come and we'll celebrate our liturgy and celebrate the name of our church. And then there's regional saints, like for us, St. Herman of Alaska, the first American saint, is very big for us. So we'll celebrate him as well. So all these things have that. We're almost done. So, yep, we are done. Fasting periods. It's the last thing I'll talk about. Because in the Orthodox Church, we fast to celebrate. So we have to give something up as a way of showing that God is greater than us. So normally in the church, the Orthodox do not eat meat on Wednesdays and Fridays. Just something you just do. People who have to, or that, it's okay. But it's just something you get into a rhythm of understanding that I'm giving something up for God each and every day a month, each week. So we fast not to deny ourselves, but to offer something back to God. And saying, we recognize that you gave us this, so we're not going to take it. We're not going to partake of it in recognition of that. So we have certain times of the year when we fast. Some are short and some are long. We have extended periods. We're coming up to one, it starts next week. It's called the Advent fast. We celebrate, we don't eat meat from now until Christmas. So it starts November 15th. Except Thanksgiving, everyone goes and has turkey, so it's okay. Don't worry about it. This is something that takes time and you have to want to do it, right? You're not forced to do it, but it's something you want to do. We also then have Lent, from whenever Lent starts to the Easter. Then we have something in June, which is called the Apostles' Fast, which depending on the year could be 1 day or it could be 2 weeks, depending on how late Easter was. And then we have in August the Dormition fast for Mary from August 1st to 15th. So those are, if you actually take all the fasting days of the church, it comes out to about 180 days. So about half the year we try to fast. But the church is good to us because it also gives us these times where we have fast free. It means eat whatever you want, whenever you want. So like before we start Lent, the church gives us a fast free week. After Pascha, we fast all through the Paschal. We don't fast during the Paschal period. Same thing with certain times in Pentecost and stuff. We also have days where it says strict fast. Like Holy Friday is so strict, we don't even have communion on that day. And we should eat very little because that's Christ is hanging on the cross. So if you see something strict fast, that's what it means. Eat minimally. But all those things are there, again, to give us a way to celebrate and to understand that if we can't, as St. John Chrysostom said, if we can't control what goes in our mouth, how are we going to control what comes out of our mouth? And on the other one, I said, we fast from meat, but we devour our brothers. It's a great line. So sometimes it's all about what we're doing in our heart. And the fasting with the food is the easy one. I'm going to have a whole class on this. How about fasting with your eyes or your ears or your tongue?
Oh, okay.
Like, don't look at bad things. Don't listen to bad things. Don't say bad things.
They do that too. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm getting this from on TV where they don't talk for a whole day or whatever.
Oh, no, not like that. Not like that. Though at seminary we had to during the first week of Lent. We weren't allowed.
It's called the Daniel fast, the fasting Daniel did in the Old Testament.
Right.
It's like that. Give up something.
Yep, you give up something. Yeah, we at seminary we couldn't talk for that week. It drove me crazy. But anyway, no, it's not. But just always should be watching what your words are. Are your words of love or are they words of hate? Are you looking at bad things on TV or are you looking at good things that are holy? Those type of things. We try to fast, just as we in the Orthodox liturgy. If you probably noticed, we use all our senses. We have the incense. You smell. You got the eyes seeing the beauty of the icons. You hear the music. You taste the communion. All our senses are involved. And, we're touching, doing the sign of the cross and that. So just as we have all the senses that we glorify God with, we should also make sure that we use them not to harm us. So I just threw a whole lot of information at you. And next week is going to be a lot easier. We're going to start going through the liturgy. What we do on that Sunday service and why we do it and what's all the parts of it so that you understand what you're seeing. And we'll start with how we prepare the liturgy because there's a whole service I do before you even get to church. And you can see what I do. And it's usually just me alone.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's me, how I prepare the bread and the wine and all the other stuff that's going to be offered. And you'll see all about that. So are there any questions? No? Go ahead.
So, the times where you have like services every day,
Mm-hmm.
what happens if you can't attend the service? Like
You do the best you can. Yeah. I mean, they're here.
when you come?
Yeah.
When you can?
When you can, you can. I understand. People have to work, right? I try to schedule them so that people are out of work or, some I have to do at certain times. And some people take, they'll take a couple, like especially the last 2 days or 3 days with Easter and the day after Easter, they take that time off.
What time are they usually at?
What?
What time are they usually at?
During Holy Week?
Yeah.
So there's usually, most of the services are at like 6:30 at night. And though there will be some that'll be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 9 o'clock in the morning. But you'll see the calendar. I'll put it all out. I'm exhausted. Let's put it this way. When they're done, I go and disappear for like a couple of days. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to lay down. But it's a joyful thing to do.
Why so late, like 6:30?
Because the reason we do that here is because we want people to have time to get off of work and then go home, maybe eat something, and then get to church. So Saturdays, we normally do services at 5 o'clock because it's Saturday and people want to do whatever. Sunday liturgy at 9. But if I have a feast day, we'll do during the week. You'll see I'll have the Vespers at 6:30. But the liturgy will still be at 9 o'clock. And then whoever comes. For the pre-sanctified, I do 2 different times. We do on Wednesdays and Fridays. So Wednesdays, I do them at 3 o'clock because there's a number of people here who don't drive at night. So they have a chance to come. And then the other one I do on Friday nights, I usually do at 6:30 at night. So the people who are working have a chance to come to the service. And then usually on Friday night, what we do is after everyone brings a dish and we have a shared meal together. So you'll see how the rhythm goes. That's still way off. We have to get through Christmas still. So this year I think Christmas is on Sunday. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. So anyway, that's what you have a certain parameters of times that you should do. And then the priest has a little bit of flexibility of what's best for his community. Like some people will do liturgy at 10 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Some will do it at 9:30. Some will do it at 9. I like 9. That seems to work best here. And I don't want to upset the rhythm they had before I came here. So you kind of work it out.
How long have you been here?
Just 3 years.
Oh.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions?